My first question, while you make your way over there, you both talk about the carrier organization and mining and aggregating this data. Who in the carrier organization do you work with? What's the profile and what's the position of that person who leads the charge on your behalf to do all that you just both spoke about?
So from ComScore's perspective, the answer is it depends. I mean, primarily it is the CMO or the Chief Care Officer are the folks that we typically interact with. There are some instances, however, where an organization will have a head of business insights or head of customer insights or head of business analytics, and a lot of organizations are actually standing up big data teams, and those big data teams in many instances want to be part of it. But at the end of the day, what I've really seen is the organizations within a carrier that have the budget to essentially pursue something and make those decisions and that derive the business value that can say, you know what, here are the business benefits as a result of this solution, is going to be care and or marketing.
Customer care and or marketing is the champion.
That's right. At least for our solution.
Yeah, and we see the same thing, and we extend on into some more of the pedestrian things like revenue assurance. So the finance organization is also a player in that. So it does get back to what problem are you solving, and who gets the business benefit of that is the one that typically is the one that we engage with. So.
My next question is does anything that you said in either of your presentations change in the prepaid market, and if so, how? Or is the analytics challenges different, and if so, how in prepaid, and how do you see that going forward?
So my take in the prepaid market is a lot of the demographic variables that you'd like to have that are available with the postpaid market are typically not available in the prepaid market. And so you have to look for opportunities to either infer those demographics based on the information you already have, appending third-party data sources, or just using the information that's available. So some of the use cases you saw here were just based on information that was available on the device itself. And you can craft, of course, a marketing message to those users via SMS, and you can go ahead and reach those folks on a regular basis. And so I think that's kind of one of the core differences. Of course, that will vary carrier by carrier. Some are better than others in terms of collecting that information up front.
Mm-hmm. Right. Gary, you have any?
I think one of the big differences between the two is that there's a critical period in the prepaid space where if someone kind of passes that threshold, they start to look more like a long-term customer, even though they're prepaid, right? So understanding their behavior during that critical, burn-in period is important, right? The other thing that's important is understanding the usage that they have on their particular, whatever their particular service is. If they bought a certain amount of minutes on a card, for instance, right, is being able to kind of remind them of the fact that there's an opportunity to top off the card or those kinds of things. So you're the kinds of things that you would be messaging around, what you would look at in terms of churn would be at different points in time, but they would kind of align with gathering the same kind of information and taking that forward and making decisions based on that, right?
Did you have a question?
Hi guys. Just a quick question regarding on the care side of things. If a customer experiences some kind of problem and they call the customer care or they help desk, how fast are your solutions able to analyze the data? Is it real time? Because of course some of these systems are generating logs every 15 minutes, half hour, 1 hour. So the person calling is going to be calling directly after this problem possibly, and you won't have time to respond to generate that data. How are you getting around these issues?
Yeah, so that's a really good point.
Can you repeat the point, Brian?
So the question really was, when a customer calls into care, how fast are the analytics done to provide that customer that information? Because in some instances, some of the data sources may lag by a day, an hour, or 15 minutes. And if a person's calling in for a problem that just happened 30 seconds ago, is that going to be in the system? And so this brings up a really good point around the use cases and the business case associated with the solution in and of itself. And what I mean by that is our solution is beholden to upstream systems to provide data on a regular basis. And so a great example would be we typically have one SLA where information that comes in from the carriers, we've agreed with the carrier that says, you know what, it won't lag by more than 15 minutes. And then our requirement is that we have that information in there. It takes us no more than 5 minutes to process, and it renders in no more than 5 seconds. And so in that instance, it would be 20 minutes and 5 seconds between the lag. But there are other carriers who have said, you know what, we're not going to invest in the infrastructure to go ahead and move that along, because that's not trivial in and of itself. We're going to use whatever is there. And so those are instances where it's acceptable to say, you know what, there's going to be an hour lag, there may be a 4-hour lag, whatever that time period is. But that's actually really good, because
There's risk that capture the correct requirements to meet the customer.
Absolutely, and that is something that has to happen kind of early on in the discussion around the solution, which says, hey, let's understand what the cycle is by which your systems update, because that varies with others. And there are folks out there that are making a very active move towards, I'm going to say real time. And the question is, what is real time? I would propose that real time is sub 1 second response rate. So, even to the instance where you're deciding what ad to serve at a particular time, that to me is real time. So is that really required in the carrier space? I would argue that in 99% of the use cases, probably not. That's a good question.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think in the care center that you have to be able to do some analysis on the kinds of queries that you get. And most of those queries are going to be, questions around plans or things that are showing up on bills that aren't being understood, or issues around, how to use the device or whatever. Typically, they're not going to be around things that require real-time information. They tend to be more on historical information. Now, one of the things that we really kind of focus in on is making sure that when that person calls or contacts you, no matter how they do that, that you know who they are, right? So you can get to those historical records, because that's one of the very first things that the impression that you'll leave is, you call somebody and they say, well, who are you? Let me go find this. Oh, I need to transfer you over somewhere else. And they ask the same 6 questions again about who you are. We try to help alleviate that kind of stuff. But typically the kinds of questions that you're going to get are really more historical in basis instead of real time. As a matter of fact, that's one of the things that we offer, are cloud-based services. Now, we make sure that the information that's coming from you is segregated and private and that kind of stuff, but it is made available in the cloud, because that information that can then be pulled back in real time to help automate the kinds of things that you need to do. It can also be then mixed in with that third-party data that makes it rich, that enriches it, and makes it easier for you to use that information to talk to people that, for instance, you don't have as a customer, but you'd like to have as customers, right? So,
I guess from ComScore's experience, we've seen that while we've always offered a cloud solution, we have yet to have anyone take us up on it, because when push comes to shove and the business then goes to legal and privacy and says, hey, we want to send this information off to a cloud, even though you can talk about privacy and so on and so forth, it still is very sensitive information. And so at the end of the day, we end up installing it on-prem and doing an enterprise software solution.
Yeah, it is up to the individual, CSP to figure that out. Now, we haven't had that experience. We've actually had several customers that have come to us because, a trusted managed service actually is something that they desire. So.
Go ahead. Keep going. No, it's what you're here for.
Has it been analyzed what type of impact data analytics and all of this has on the network itself? So you're obviously putting a lot of data back onto the transport network. Have you analyzed the impact of data analytics on an operator network?
So let me repeat the question. The question is has anyone analyzed the impact of all this data onto the network, how it's impacting the network itself?
Correct, because that's increasing costs again, reducing their own data traffic, so there's a lot of cost, there's the risk again.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess so. So I've not seen a specific analysis of the impact of analytics on the carrier's internal network. What I will say, though, is In many of the discussions that we are involved in, there is always a portion where we talk about rationalization of data within the carrier's network. And so what I mean by that is, instead of creating multiple copies of the same data set, why not use the core data set and doing those analytics once as opposed to multiple times? And so from that perspective, we have seen, I've seen some very clear initiatives at networks to say, you know what, we're not going to store 5 copies of these, we're going to store 1 copy, and you can reach into this data set and do the analytics as required. And so, we've had to adapt our software to do that in situations where it's required to essentially say, hey, let's reach into this data set instead of transporting it again and go ahead and do our calculations.
Right.
That's it, yeah, that's good.
I also think that there are 2 different kinds of queries for data, right? There are the passive queries for data, stuff that's actually being thrown out from the probes or from the switches or from the routers, right? Anyway, right? And so it's just a matter of picking that stuff up and working with it, right? And you judge whether you need to do those polls at whatever frequency makes sense, right? The other one is what I call active queries, right? So for instance, if you want to do location and you keep hitting the HLR over and over and over again, that has an impact on your network, right? And so you have to kind of create a balance between passive and active data collection to kind of make the case for how you use that stuff, right?
Just my experience in the operator network, it's a lot of the information that you want to get, that's going to be coming from your OS, your BSCs, your nodes and stuff, and then the transport link, that backhaul, that's very expensive. That's almost 50% of an operator's operational budget. And if you're pulling the nodes and BSCs, and BSCs and stuff like that, all of this is being put on the network. You're saturating that link, and so you're adding to the capacity crunch issue that their operators have. If you do this every 15 minutes or something.
If you need to determine that you need to have real time, right? So again, most of the queries that come into this stuff are more historical in nature, and those could be scheduled at off-peak times to pull some of that stuff. It's not an easy thing to figure out, right? But it's one of those things that is a balance between business needs.
Our experience has been, we're typically using data sets that are already created but haven't necessarily been monetized. So if you look at CDRs, IPDRs, where it gets a little bit harder sometimes is some of the DPI information. It may not have been used to the full extent just yet. So that's a case where there may be some additional traffic generated, but some of the other larger data sets are kind of already being created, and we're looking for the source where we can go ahead and ingest the relevant records for our analytics.
Any other questions? All right. Well, then I think we should let these guys go. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you.